Hello everyone, welcome to GNU according to CD. That is Government of National Unity. A lot is going on under this government and I'm kind of like liking it. So without further ado, let's get into this video. It's another commentary video of a video that I came across on the internet. And the video is by a channel called LT Celeb Times, and I will link their channel in the description box for you to check them out if you are interested in their content. Other than that, let's get to today's video. It's another reaction video to a video that former President Thabo Mbeki did two different speeches, but this video is twofold as well. So I'm going to react on both these videos on what the former President Thabo Mbeki said about the word xenophobia and South African people.
The CEO here of the foundation was telling me as we're coming that yesterday he had some interaction with some young intellectuals, South African, speaking various languages.
That's because, Mr. President, this conversation didn't start today. It actually started during your tenures as president of the country. I remember in the late 90s to 2000s, young people, meaning my age group at the time, used to be gravely concerned about the influx of foreign nationals without any explanation given to South Africans or how we felt about their presence in South Africa and inserting themselves in our communities. Mr. President, some of them even went to our schools and demonstrated scary and unusual behaviors of sporadic violent tendencies, and we didn't understand why or what was going on. This is when I discovered while in high school that South African pupils that go to school with these foreign national kids are sitting ducks because it may be possible that they classmates from other countries in Africa may be going through symptoms of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. From being former child soldiers, I did not understand, Mr. President, why South African kids were being subjected to this type of threat. It did not take too long before a South African pupil was almost killed by a foreign kid who suddenly had a burst or a thirst to take a life. To him, it was a norm. Fortunately, a teacher who was once an army or a soldier during the days of apartheid realized the symptoms and the behavior of the foreign pupil, what he was demonstrating while he was squeezing the life out of his fellow South African pupil. The teacher used all sorts of negotiation skills that a soldier would, a PTSD suffering soldier would. Slowly, the foreign national kid began to loosen his grip on his fellow South African pupil whose body was already limp. The teacher knelt down and did CPR on him, fortunately bringing him back to life. Of course, Mr. President, this sparked great concerns among parents fearing for their children's lives, but the Department of Education did nothing. Mr. President, it turned out that the foreign kid was a child soldier back in his own country. He got triggered by the South African kid because he made some hand gestures to the child soldier, the former child soldier, that suggested enemy, and therefore he went for the kill. Fortunately, he did not succeed. Mr. President, the foreign kids in our schools during my time did not enjoy making friends with us simply because we fear them. Not that we fear them as people, but what they were capable of. Because, Mr. President, no one told us why we have foreigners in our communities. We still opened our hearts to them, our homes, and gave them access to our education system and even built relations with them, thinking that we were doing the right thing. Signs were there that the majority of them were uncultured, and as a result, they seem to have forgotten that they were visitors. Our mistake, Mr. President, we thought that they were like us. They believed in the same values and principles as us, Ubuntu. We were dead wrong because it did not take even a year for them to show us flames. Mr. President, my family moved from KZN to Johannesburg after returning from Swaziland as a result of political violence in my township, where it was more prevalent than anywhere else in KwaZulu-Natal in the mid-1980s. We arrived in Hillbrow on the 23rd of December 1993. I remember this because 2 days later, it was Christmas Day. Mr. President, Hillbrow in 1993 was beautiful. The streets were clean. The buildings looked as though they were painted just yesterday. There was this beautiful park that my siblings and I would go play and swing, and other facilities that were built for kids at that park. My favorite part of that park was the gorgeous waterfall feature that faced Nugget Street as you drive up. It must have been a year after the 1994 elections when Hillbrow suddenly looked different. It was suddenly full of people that did not look nothing like us, spoke different languages that were not spoken in South Africa. And they were changing the face of Hillbrow. Each day, Hillbrow simply turned into a scary place. You no longer felt safe to go to Checkers when it used to be Checkers before it amalgamated to what it is today, ShopRite. By 1996, Mr. President, Hillbrow resembled what looked like a war zone. I have never in my life seen a dead body except that of my grandmother in her coffin. But every morning, whenever I went to buy bread at Checkers, I would come across more than one body. And it was clear that these bodies were people that were robbed either coming from work or going to work. Today, Mr. President, I doubt that Hillbrow, Berea, Yeovil, and even downtown Johannesburg, the majority of these places, you would find South Africans living there. I even doubt that a South African right in their sober mind goes to hang out in Hillbrow or even downtown Johannesburg. Mr. President, the Johannesburg CBD is unrecognizable. Imagine the mighty city of Johannesburg, which is promoted as world-class city, looks like past World War II and very scary to go to. Our streets, Mr. President, you walk on them with Nkosi Sikelel, because our pavements, the ones that we pay taxes for to walk on freely, are occupied by people who have total disregard for the bylaws of the city. Pedestrians are competing with vehicles on the streets just so to get to the other side. Murder rates keep climbing in the city of Johannesburg, yet we have Hillbrow Police Station, Yeovil Police Station, and we even have the John Foster, aka Joburg Central. But crimes of murder just keeps climbing, and the city looks almost like post-war. Probably as I script this video, Mr. President, a mother is looking for a 13 or a 14 or a 15 or even a 16-year-old daughter who went to buy her onions and never returned. This mother would be looking for her daughter for months, if not years. Reason being, she had been kidnapped while going to the store to buy onions by somebody who is not of South African origin. He will inject her with drugs, get her addicted and dependent on the drugs, but importantly, forget about her family, then place her on the streets to become a prostitute. She does not even see a cent of the money her fragile body forcefully made. Mr. President, don't get me started with the military-style cash-in-transit heists that the people of South Africa have been accustomed to. Today, no South African motorist dares to drive behind or next to those vehicles for fear of catching stray bullets or crossfire whenever something like this happens. Mr. President, other than our white counterparts who were conscripted to go to the army, have army military tactics and skills. Not for black people, we were never conscripted to the army during apartheid. Yet these cash-in transit heists have military features to them. Surely South African intelligence would have known, or at least could tell, that these military tactics were of SANDF or not. Hijacking has hit the roof, Mr. President, and kidnapping for ransom are on the rise. And you and I know that no South African has the capacity or capability to do that because it's not our crime. Again, this needs military training or a military trained person to execute a successful kidnapping for ransom. Mr. President, coming back to your speech, please continue and I shall react to what you say. Let's see if you and many South Africans have been saying the same thing as the intellectuals that you had a conversation with, and your thoughts.
And they were discussing what is the word in Setswana for xenophobia.
Mr. President, the first time I heard this word xenophobia, I remember asking if it was even a real word. Mind you, I am a first generation coconut. This makes me feel better that I am not the only one who didn't know. But I am interested to hear if other South African native languages do.
And no, it doesn't exist.
How? Even in other South African native languages, the word doesn't exist? This is getting interesting.
In Zulu? Uh-uh.
Definitely not in Zulu, Mr. President.
So in all the African languages that were spoken by this group, they all say, no, we don't know what the word is in our African languages for xenophobia. Why?
Because, Mr. President, South Africans are known for embracing people of all walks of life, irrespective of origin, ethnicity, the works. We have Ubuntu. Having said that, we are not capable of hate or the fear of the unknown.
It's because it's not in the culture.
It is not in our culture of all South Africans, with the exception of racists.
It's not in the history. It's not in the whatever among Africans.
Definitely not in our history. And I like that you, Mr. President, are being inclusive of other Africans. I can't say much about them. I can only speak for South African citizens because it's only them I know best.
And yet I'm saying, like the American lady, we've allowed somebody else to tell us that was xenophobic.
Oh, this label of xenophobia was given to us by an American lady? I bet she's white. And because it comes from an American, it makes sense now why some South Africans actually believe that we are xenophobic. All because they heard it from an American, the begin all and end all stamp of approval. Sad.
And we believe it.
I just said that. Those that heard it from this American lady believe it.
It doesn't affect only Nigerians.
Mr. President, let's get to what I said earlier in this video, painting you the picture of the early 1990s and what we South Africans have been subjected to. Yeah, what about Nigerians?
But the truth of the matter is that there are Nigerian criminals who are involved in drug dealing.
Nazo.
And that's true. And there are Nigerian criminals who are involved in prostitution.
What have South Africans been saying since the late 1990s? I just told a possible story of a mother of a 13th or 14th or 15th or even a 16-year-old girl.
Rosettenville.
Rosettenville, Mr. President, is a Nigerian suburb now. And none of those houses that belong to South Africans anymore because they've been hijacked. Every single one of those houses. They've turned them into drug dens and brothels and where they hold their kidnapped victims. I'm surprised that they haven't hijacked the race course. Or maybe they don't know anything about horses.
It's been against criminals, not Nigerians.
Mr. President, that's because the police are in the pockets of the criminal Nigerians. We are labeled xenophobic when we say that. The first people to call South Africans that, it's South African media. The South African media sell South Africans to the world as xenophobic, when all we are doing is clean our communities and protecting our children from drugs and prostitution. South African media wants South Africans to be ruled by Nigerian criminals and turn South Africa into anarchy. Mr. President, I can proudly tell you that I've since boycotted the South African media, who betray its citizens with each report they do, calling us xenophobic for taking a stand. It's been 3 years since I've watched the news, especially in all these South African news channels. I hope South Africans at some point in their life come to realize that the South African media hates South Africans, and hopefully they stop supporting those news channels.
There's no South African who goes around chasing Nigerians because they're Nigerian. It doesn't exist.
I asked this question in my previous video. Where is it where South Africans are actively on the streets chasing Nigerians? Isn't isn't xenophobia about that, where Nigerians live in fear of their lives? They can't even walk to the store to buy food items. Gandhi, what is xenophobia? Because it's often associated with the word attack. Who are these Nigerians that are getting attacked and killed by South Africans? Maybe the South African media has an idea.
But they will act. They will act against this person. Whether it's Nigerian or South African, who they say, this one is feeding our children drugs and destroying young lives.
Louder, Mr. President, for the Pan-Africanist at the back. Yes, these are the other group of people who hate South Africans, the so-called Pan-Africanists. They've turned this idea into something that many South Africans are beginning to hate. If Africans must unite, why here? What's so special about South Africa that it is the place for Africans to come and unite at? The same Pan-Africanists say nothing when Nigerians kill the future of our country with drugs and kidnapping young girls for prostitution. They are the traitors of this country. South African Pan-Africanists are the enemy of South Africans, and they need to be stopped because we are fed up of them selling our country. What these African countries need to do is to go and fix their countries, and then we can talk about unity.
Then they report to the police. The police don't act. Then the community takes the law into its hands. That will happen.
That is how South Africans have been doing things. Where there is a lack of policing or police response, we take matters into our own hands, whether you are a South African or not. How is that xenophobic? Y'all want us to roll over and play dead? We've been doing that, and those days are over. We are standing up for our country, whether you like it or not.
It's incorrect to read that as being an offensive against Nigerians in South Africa, because it's not true.
Mr. President, a young gentleman by the name of Xolani Francis Oktola did a typical South African thing by taking matters into his own hands, by cleansing his community of drugs, by facing them head on, confronting the drug pushers and drug lords. And because these drug pushers and drug lords have the police in their pockets, today Xolani is smeared with a murder, all to silence him. That is another thing, Mr. President. The police of this country have turned themselves into the enemy of the people. You see, Mr. President, South Africans have nowhere to go and no one to turn to, but to use these powers collectively to fight the ills in our communities because of criminals who are not even South Africans. Our border patrols are another enemy of the people, Mr. President. Don't even get me started with Home Affairs. Home Affairs should just be charged with treason, period. The ills of South Africa are attributed to Home Affairs. I don't know why by now a lifestyle audit isn't conducted on Home Affairs officials as a whole. Home Affairs sold South Africa to the dogs, and today they have the audacity to tell us how to do things in our own country. We fought for so hard and had lives lost just so we can have this South Africa today. Where were they? These bloodsuckers only go to countries where economies start showing growth. Instead of fixing their own countries, they run like cowards to bother other people on their homelands and turn around and accuse them of envy. Envy for killing the future of those countries with drugs? They are leeches.
It's incorrect to read that as being an offensive against Nigerians in South Africa, because it's not true.
But Mr. President, we are told that we offensive to Nigerians when we try to take our communities back. They call us xenophobic against Nigerians. We know it's not true because they are still here, Mr. President. They live amongst us. They say we kill them on a daily basis because we are xenophobic. I don't understand how come they are still here and very much alive and healthy.
So I'm saying when we talk about xenophobia and Afrophobia,
Oh, there's another one, Mr. President. Afrophobia? Never heard of this one either. This is the first time I'm hearing of it. I know that word doesn't exist in our native languages either in South Africa.
a group of people from one of the townships, Mamelodi, said we want to march to the ministry, said we want to march to the Ministry of Home Affairs to put a petition because we're complaining about lack of regulations with regard to immigrants and so on. So the municipality gave them permission to march. They were then joined by a group from another township, Atteridgeville. So they marched to the office, people from Mamelodi, delivered their petition, and went back home peacefully.
Mr. President, I'm sure you are not aware of this. If you are, because you were president, surely your intelligence must have informed you. But every time South Africans took to the street to demonstrate, to call government to intervene, these demonstrations are often penetrated by foreign nationals with the intention of destroying the good name and image of South Africa by bringing weapons and going into communities they know very well foreign nationals live there, and they would start killing them, turning some of these communities looking like a scene of a community they come from after guerrillas came and wiped out their communities. And South Africans are the ones that are blamed for killings. We don't kill, Mr. President. We were not raised like that, Mr. President. And no South African has it in them to pick up a weapon and kill another human being. Of course, this is with the exception of criminals and those that practice GBV, because we know eventually they do kill the women. In a nutshell, Mr. President, the world wants us to fold our arms and do nothing, say nothing, and just watch our country hijacked and destroyed. They want us to be silent when we get mocked and disrespected and made to feel guilty for having taken the path we took of peace in our land. They gaslight us and to try shut us up because we have white people, Indian people, Asian people, and colored people. And worst of all, for taking the decision for them to represent us at a global event. They have no idea how we don't have hate in our hearts. All we have is love and forgiveness. We believe in the wrath of God. And those that also have identity crisis in their own countries because of the hate they experience of white people, Latinas, Indians, and whatever else, they want to impose their hatefulness onto South Africans. And they even tell us to drive away our fellow South African citizens of different races. We will not be told what to do. This is our country. We chose a path and we are sticking to that path. Yes, we are a country, Mr. President, with lots of issues. And it's not like we're sitting on our laurels about it. We discuss, we fight each other, and we agree that definitely another CODESA must be held. This is a call that must never die until CODESA Part 2 happens so that the wealth of the country can be spread out and enjoyed by all South Africans. And we are not going to allow anybody to try and make us feel guilty that 70% of our economy are in the hands of white people. One day, we will all be in control of our economy. You eat an elephant one bite at a time, not rushing things. And at the end of the day, you hurt yourself. Well, thank you so much for listening. And please do not leave this video without liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. If you want more of this kind of content, please subscribe. Goodbye.